Hey, I'm talking to you. You cannot be back here. This is a live aircraft, not a toy, and you are standing in a restricted area with your hands all over my ramp. The voice came off the cargo ramp of the gunship before anyone had bothered to look at the woman it was aimed at. Staff Sergeant Tanner Culpepper stood at the top of the ramp in a flight suit that still held its creases, 24 years old, loud in the way a man is loud when he has an audience, and a uniform, and no idea how small both can turn out to be. Below him, in the flat white light of the hangar, a woman in a plain gray jacket stood with one hand resting on the aluminum lip of the ramp. She was not old, whatever the airman decided in the first half-second. She was somewhere in her middle 30s, unremarkable in the way that only very deliberate people manage, with the kind of stillness that most people never learn because they have never had a reason to. "The public tour is out front," Culpepper said. "This is the flight line side. Off the ramp, let's go." She did not answer. She did not move fast enough for him, so he came down 2 steps and put the flat of his hand against her shoulder and pushed. She did not stumble. She stepped back once, exactly as far as the push required and no farther, and let her hand come off the ramp on its own time. There was no outrage in it. There was nothing in it at all, and that absence was the first thing in the hangar that did not fit. A shove like that was supposed to buy a reaction. It was supposed to buy a flinch, a scowl, an apology, a scurry toward the door. It bought none of those. It bought a single measured step and a silence that somehow made the sergeant look smaller than he had a moment before. It was 0900 on the morning before a change of command. The squadron's AC-130 sat nose out under the lights, its 4 blades still, the long barrels of its guns caught in the overhead glare, the smell of hydraulic fluid and cold metal and floor wax thick in the closed air. Blue and silver bunting hung half-strung along the far wall, where 2 airmen had abandoned it to watch. Folding chairs waited in crooked rows on the polished concrete. Tomorrow, a new commander would take the squadron in front of a general and 300 guests, with a band and a speech and a pair of scissors for a ribbon. This morning, the hangar belonged to a handful of young airmen, prepping the aircraft for static display. And to Staff Sergeant Culpepper, who had decided the lost woman wandering his flight line was the most interesting thing to happen all week. Across the floor, near the maintenance desk, Chief Master Sergeant Isaiah Fontaine stopped writing. Fontaine was 47 and had spent 29 years in the Air Force, 11 of them in the back of gunships over places the news never named correctly. He was the squadron superintendent, the senior enlisted man in the unit, and he had learned a long time ago that the important things in a room were almost never the loud ones. He watched the woman in the gray jacket step off the ramp under her own power, square herself to the aircraft, and look at the gun. Not at Culpepper. At the gun. She read it the way a person reads a face they have not seen in years. The barrels, the ammunition feed, the scorch pattern along the aft fuselage that the restoration crew had never quite sanded out. Her eyes moved in a fixed, professional order, top to bottom, left to right, and came to rest for a moment on the empty crew station just aft of the wing, and stayed there a beat too long. "There you go," Culpepper said, pleased, turning to his crew. "Some people just need it spelled out." Senior Airman Beau Faulkner, 21 and already laughing, lifted his phone and framed the shot. 2 other airmen drifted in from the bunting wall, sensing sport. The woman said nothing. She set her hand flat against the cold aluminum of the ramp lip one more time. 1 second, no more, and let it fall. Fontaine's clipboard lowered an inch and did not come back up. He had stood next to 2 kinds of people in his life, who held themselves the way the woman in the gray jacket held herself. One kind were snipers, the other kind flew. And there was something about the exact spot her eyes had gone to on the aircraft That empty station aft of the wing that put a cold thread down the back of a man who had spent half his career sitting in one just like it. He set the clipboard down on the maintenance desk without looking at it. He had been a superintendent long enough to know the difference between a civilian who had wandered somewhere they should not be and a professional standing exactly where they meant to stand. And every instinct he owned had just told him which of the two this was. A civilian in a hangar keeps their hands close to their body and their eyes moving nervously between the exits. This woman had reached out and touched the airframe like it belonged to her, and the only thing her eyes had checked was the gun and the empty seat. Fontaine did not know her name yet. He knew her kind, and he knew that his youngest Loadmaster had just put a hand on one of them and did not have the first idea what that was going to cost. The airman saw a lost woman's mistake. Fontaine saw a pilot counting rounds on an aircraft she had not been told she would ever stand next to again, and he did not yet trust what that meant. A tie-down chain slipped off the edge of a cargo pallet behind her and swung heavy and fast toward the small of her back. She did not turn around. She caught it with 2 fingers without looking, stopped it dead, and reseated the binder against the pallet in one motion, the way a person does a thing they have done 10,000 times in the dark, in a moving aircraft, with the deck pitching under them. She did it without breaking the line of her attention on the gun. She did it the way you breathe. Faulkner stopped narrating for a second. Then he started again, because it was easier than thinking about what he had just seen. "Tour ladies got moves," he said, uncertainly, and a couple of the airmen laughed because he wanted them to. Culpepper was still performing. He slapped the flank of the aircraft with an open hand and said, to the crowd more than to her, "This right here is a 105mm cannon, biggest gun the Air Force flies. You do not get to touch history, ma'am. You get to look at it from behind the rope like everybody else's grandmother." "It's a gun," the woman said. Her voice was quiet and even and carried anyway, the way a voice carries when it is used to being heard over turbines and headsets and never has to strain. Culpepper turned. "What?" "It's a gun," she said again, not unkindly, still looking at the barrel. "Not a cannon. The 105 is the gun. The one forward of it is the 25mm, and the reunion placard you set out front last night has the tail number turned around. That airframe you painted on the board was lost over water in 2001. This one is not that airplane." She nodded a fraction toward the smaller barrel. "You'll want to fix it before the general reads it tomorrow." For a moment, Culpepper had nothing at all. The correction was too specific, delivered too flatly, and it had the terrible quality of being obviously true. Then Faulkner laughed, and that gave the sergeant his footing back. "Look at Grandma," he said, reading the placards. "You memorized the gift shop too?" Fontaine crossed half the floor. He was not hurrying. He was watching her hands, and her eye line, and the way she stood. Weight even, chin level, shoulders loose, absolutely still in a room full of motion. He was watching the way she had said 2001 without a flicker, the way a person says a year that cost them something. There was more, once he knew to look for it. The way she had stepped exactly 1 pace back off the ramp and no farther, measuring the distance without thinking, the habit of a person who has learned to give ground precisely and never an inch more than a situation requires. The way her weight sat over the balls of her feet. The way, when Faulkner circled her with the camera, her eyes tracked him once and then dismissed him. Threat assessed, threat filed, threat found wanting, and returned to the aircraft. None of it was aggressive. All of it was the grammar of a person who had spent years in situations where reading a room wrong got people killed, and who could no longer stop reading a room, even in a bright hangar full of children playing at being hard. The name came up out of some old part of his memory before he could stop it. A call sign that had crossed an entire theater one autumn, spoken on nets by men who had never seen the face that went with it, spoken the way you speak the name of the thing that comes when everything else has already failed. He said it to himself, under his breath, and did not believe it. Banshee. He would not have said it out loud, so he kept it, and he kept moving, and he watched the thing he was afraid he already understood get worse. Faulkner had the camera up full now. He walked a slow half-circle around the woman, giving the phone her stillness, her plain jacket, her flat refusal to be embarrassed. "We got a live one at the open house, folks," he said, in the bright, ugly voice people use when a camera has turned a person into content. Tour lady found the flight line. Somebody call her a golf cart. A third airman drifted over, then a fourth, pulled by the gravity of a crowd forming. Someone repeated the nickname, the tour lady, and it stuck the way cruel, small things stick, passed mouth to mouth because it cost nothing and felt like belonging. There were 7 of them around her now, young, loud, certain, and one woman standing in the middle of it saying nothing. Not all 7 were laughing. One of them, a slight airman named Ruiz, who had been on the bunting wall a minute ago, had drifted to the edge of the group and stopped laughing somewhere around, the moment the woman caught the chain. He kept glancing at her hands, and then at the empty crew station she had looked at, and then at Chief Fontaine, and the math he was doing behind his eyes was not the same math the others were doing. He wanted to say something. He did not have the rank or the nerve, and he would spend a long time afterward wishing he had found one or the other. For now he only watched, and felt the thing in his chest that a person feels when they are standing in a crowd that is making a mistake, and cannot yet make themselves step out of it. Culpepper warmed to it. He stepped in close, crowding her back off the painted restricted line, hurting her the way you hurt something you have decided is beneath your concern. "Come on," he said. "Out front. You wait behind the rope like everybody's grandmother, and when the doors open at 1100, you can take all the pictures you want. This is the part where you say thank you, Sergeant, and you walk." She held her ground, not aggressively. She simply did not go, and there was no force in the hangar that seemed to reach her. She let him crowd the air around her, and she did not give it back, and she did not escalate it, and the not giving was somehow more solid than any push he could have answered. "Sergeant," Fontaine's voice from 6 feet away. "Ease off. Now." Culpepper glanced at him and waved a hand. A small, dismissive thing. The gesture of a man who thinks the rules are on his side, and the chief is being soft. "I've got it, Chief. Restricted area. She's the one out of bounds, not me. You want me to just let civilians walk up and grab the aircraft?" Fontaine's jaw set. He knew exactly how right the sergeant was about the letter of it, and exactly how wrong he was about everything that mattered, and he knew that the distance between those two things was about to become the most expensive lesson of a young man's life. The woman finally looked at Culpepper. One look, flat, unhurried, complete. It was not a glare. There was no anger in it to grab onto. It was the look of someone taking a full and permanent measurement, filing a young man away in a place he could not see and would not like, and for reasons he could not have named, it made Culpepper want to raise the stakes rather than lower them. If you have ever watched someone decide that a quiet person is a nobody, stay with this one, and subscribe to the Veteran Vault. The bit needed somewhere to go, and Culpepper took it where the small and frightened part of him always took things, toward an accusation. There was a plain government lanyard at the woman's collar, half tucked into the gray jacket, the laminated card turned inward, the way people wear them when they do not want to be read. Culpepper saw a corner of it and reached out and flipped it up with one finger, the way you flip a thing you have already decided is worthless. "What is that?" he said. "That a badge you printed at the library, huh? You come onto a military installation, walk out to a live aircraft, put on a little lanyard, and play dress-up. He let go of it and stepped back, loud now, playing it for the phone. "That's stolen valor, ladies and gentlemen. That's a fraud. We get one of these a month. Sad folks who put on a lanyard and pretend they belong on a flight line." The card fell back against her jacket, still turned inward. She did not grab for it. She did not defend it. She reached up slowly and tucked it away completely, and said nothing at all, and the silence made the accusation hang in the air and rot. Two of the younger airmen exchanged a look. Something was wrong with the shape of this now. The woman had not behaved like a fraud at any point. A fraud argues. A fraud produces the fake badge and insists on it. A fraud gets loud. This woman had corrected the sergeant on the caliber of a gun and the provenance of an airframe, had stopped a swinging chain without looking, and had absorbed a shove and an accusation with the same unbroken calm, and none of that was in the script of a lost tourist. "I'm serious now," Culpepper said, and some of the fun had gone out of his voice, replaced by something meaner and more certain, because the small, frightened part of him could feel the ground moving and did not know why. "Ma'am, you are leaving this hangar, right now, before I call the cops on a woman playing airman in my building." He turned to Faulkner. "Keep filming. Get the fraud on camera. This is going online." The other airmen had gone quiet. The nickname had been funny. This wasn't funny, and the younger ones could feel the floor shifting, even if they could not have said why. One of them looked at the ground. Another looked at Fontaine, the way people look to the one adult in a room when a thing has gone too far. The word fraud was the one that did it. There is a line between mockery and accusation, and mockery can be laughed off in the morning, but an accusation of stolen valor is a serious thing to level at a person on a military installation, and leveling it at a stranger who had done nothing but correct a placard and stop a chain had a smell to it that even the airmen who had been laughing did not like. Faulkner had lowered the phone an inch without meaning to. The bright, ugly energy of a minute ago had curdled into something none of them wanted their name attached to, and the only person in the group who could not feel it was the one doing the accusing. Fontaine had seen enough. He moved in, not fast, but with the kind of deliberateness that changes the temperature of a room, and put himself at the edge of it, between the sergeant and the woman. "Sergeant Culpepper." "Chief, respectfully." "That was not a conversation," Fontaine said. "That was me starting to give you an order. You want to stand down before I finish it, son. You want that very badly, and you do not know it yet." Culpepper actually laughed. It was a short, disbelieving sound. "For her?" Fontaine did not answer him. He was looking at the woman, and the woman was looking back at him now, and for the first time the recognition ran both directions, quiet and complete, across 8 years and half a world. Fontaine had stopped suspecting. That was the dangerous part for Culpepper, though the sergeant could not know it yet. A superintendent with 29 years in does not put himself between a staff sergeant and a stranger unless he already knows exactly how the next 60 seconds end, and has decided which of the two people in front of him he is protecting. "Son," Fontaine said quietly, so it stayed between the few of them. "You have no idea who that is." "I know she's a civilian in a restricted area," Culpepper said. "I know the reg. Do you want me to read it to you, Chief?" "I want you to stop talking," Fontaine said. "I am telling you, one time, as a favor, you will not understand for about 4 minutes. Close your mouth and take 3 steps back, and let me handle this before you do something that follows you the rest of your life." For a heartbeat, something in Culpepper's face wavered. The chief was not soft. The chief did not do this. Fontaine had a reputation across the whole wing as a man who did not spend words and did not spend them on nothing, and some animal part of the sergeant registered the wrongness of a man like that stepping in for a lost tourist. And then his pride closed back over the gap, like water over a dropped stone, because he had an audience and a camera, and he was right about the regulation. And being right about the small thing felt exactly like being safe. "With respect, Chief," he said, loud again for the room. "I've got it handled. You don't have to babysit me on my own aircraft." Fontaine held his eyes one more second. Then he turned his head a few degrees toward the front of the hangar, toward the big doors where the group commander's advance party had been walking the setup for tomorrow, and he lifted 2 fingers to a young airman at the edge of the crowd. "Go. Get them. Now." The airman looked once at the scene, understood that something serious was happening, even if he did not know what, and went at a dead run. Fontaine had made a career out of knowing when a thing had passed the point where it could be talked down and had become a thing that simply had to be gotten through. This had passed that point. He could not stop what was coming now. The sergeant had built too much momentum, said too much in front of too many people, put his hands where they should never have gone. And a part of the chief, the hard old part that had watched a great many young men learn hard lessons, understood that some lessons cannot be prevented, only witnessed and survived. So he stopped trying to prevent it. He set himself instead to make sure that, when it landed cleanly, in front of the right people, on the right person, and that the woman in the gray jacket never had to raise her hand or her voice to make it happen. Fontaine turned back to the woman. He did not brace to attention. Not here, not yet. Not in a way that would tip it before the room was ready to hold the weight of it. But his spine changed, and she saw it change, and something almost like warmth moved behind her still expression, the first thing that had reached her face since the shove. She knew him. He had been a young sensor operator once, in the back of a different aircraft, on a different continent, on a night neither of them ever fully left. She had not seen his face in 8 years. She had never expected to see it again. And here it was, grayer and heavier, and carrying the same steadiness she had trusted her life to more than once. Neither of them said the year out loud. They did not have to. Some years live in the body and do not need to be spoken. What the young Loadmaster did not know is what the next 4 minutes were about to teach him. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault so you do not miss it. 8 years earlier, on a cold night over the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, Captain Delaney Rourke had flown a burning airplane the way she did everything, without raising her voice. It was the autumn of 2018. 14,000 feet below the aircraft, a 12-man ground team was pinned in a dry riverbed by a force that had them ranged and did not intend to let them leave. The radios were a wall of noise, the team leader's voice climbing, rounds cracking under his transmissions, a man somewhere in the background calling for a corpsman that could not come. Rourke held the gunship in its long left-hand pylon turn above them. The aircraft canted hard on its wing, the guns pointed down into the dark at the center of the circle, and she kept that circle tighter and steadier than the manual said was possible, because inside it were 12 people who would die if she let it drift even a little. On the sensors in the back sat Airman First Class Sam Redding, 20 years old, 6 months in the squadron, the youngest man on the crew. He had a picture of a dog taped to the edge of his console, and he called the targets in a voice that shook the first time and did not shake after that, because she told him, flat and calm over the interphone, "You're doing fine, Redding. Slow is smooth. Talk to me." And he did. He talked to her through the whole of it, calling movement, calling range, walking the gun onto the muzzle flashes with a precision that a man twice his age would have been proud of. The anti-aircraft fire found them on the 4th orbit. It walked up out of the black in long, lazy strings of light, deceptively slow, closer each pass, and then it stopped walking and simply arrived. The aircraft shuddered like a struck bell. A round came through the fuselage, and something in the cargo compartment caught. and heat and smoke rolled forward through the aircraft, and the alarms began, and the calm voice on the interphone said only, "Fire in the back. We are staying on station," because the 12 men in the riverbed were still alive and still needed the gun, and there was no version of Delaney Rourke that left them. She kept the gun on the target. She kept the orbit. She flew the airplane through the smoke and the alarms and the shouted checklists with her hands and her feet, doing 3 jobs at once, and her voice never climbing so much as a half step. And when the ground team was finally off the X and moving to their extraction, she rolled the wounded aircraft north and pointed it at home, and started the long, ugly flight, back with an engine failing and a fire that would not fully die. Sam Redding did not make it home. He had stayed on his sensors through the fire, through the heat and the smoke, refusing to leave his station until the last of the team was clear, and the thing that had come through the aircraft had come through where he sat. He was 20 years old. He had told her, on the transit out, that he was going to buy a truck when he got home, and that his dog did not like anyone but him. She had gone back to him once the aircraft was level, and the fire was beaten down to smoke, unstrapping and crossing the pitching deck to the crew station aft of the wing, and she had known before she reached him. She had knelt beside him anyway, in the dark and the noise, and she had put her hand flat on his chest the way you do when there is nothing left to do, and she had held it there for the length of one breath while the airplane carried them both north. Then she had gone back to the front and flown the rest of the way home, because there were still 4 other people alive on the aircraft, and they were her responsibility too. And grief is a thing you are allowed to have only after everyone else is safe. She did not cry until the wheels were down. That was the kind of pilot she was, and it was the kind of thing that the loudest men in any hangar never learn, and the quietest ones already know. They gave Rourke the Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor for that night, and a Silver Star, and a Purple Heart she never mentioned to anyone. The ground team gave her something that lasted longer. On the net that night, half crazed with relief as the gun kept coming, when every law of sense said the aircraft should have broken off and run. One of them had called the airplane by a name, keening and merciless and unwilling to leave, and the name had come loose from the aircraft and stuck to the woman flying it. Banshee, the voice in the dark that wails over the enemy and will not abandon her own. 8 years later, her hand rested flat on a cold cargo ramp in a bright hangar. The same reflex, the same stillness, the same name she never once used for herself. Back in the present, in the white light and the folding chairs and the half-hung bunting, Staff Sergeant Culpepper made the last mistake available to him. He decided the woman had cost him enough face in front of his crew, and he reached out and took her by the upper arm. A real grip, fingers closing hard through the sleeve of the gray jacket, the grip of a man moving a thing that wouldn't move itself, and he pulled her toward the hangar doors. "Today, lady," he said, low and ugly now. The audience forgotten, the camera forgotten, only his own thin certainty left. "You're nobody. You're a lost tourist in the wrong building on the wrong day. So walk." She did not resist him. That was the thing Fontaine would remember for the rest of his career. That she did not pull away, did not set her feet, did not do any of the small, desperate things a frightened person does when a stronger person takes hold of them. She let the grip turn her a few degrees toward the doors, the way water lets you push it, offering nothing to fight against. And then she turned the rest of the way herself. Squarely. On her own line, at her own speed, until she was facing him, chin level, eyes flat and calm, and absolutely without fear. Close enough that he could see there was no performance in her at all, that there never had been, that everything about her was exactly as economical and exact as it appeared. She looked up into the face of the young man holding her arm as if she were reading an instrument. "Take your hand off me, Sergeant," she said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. It was the voice from the interphone, the voice that had held an orbit through a fire and talked a frightened 20-year-old through the last calm minutes of his life, and some animal part of Culpepper heard the entire weight of it in 4 words. His hand opened before his mind had decided anything. He felt, for the first time, the floor tilt under a certainty he had never once thought to question, the certainty that he was the most important person in this hangar, and that the quiet ones were quiet because they were small. He had spent his whole short career around loud authority, instructors who screamed, sergeants who filled a room with their own noise, men who established that they mattered by making sure you could not ignore them. He had learned to read power as volume, and here was a woman who had not raised her voice one time, who had absorbed a shove and a nickname and an accusation of fraud without so much as a change in her breathing, and who had just, with 4 flat words, made every hair on his arm stand up. Nothing in his training had prepared him for authority that quiet. It was the most frightening thing he had ever stood next to, precisely because it did not need him to be afraid of it. Fontaine was already moving, and at the front of the hangar, the big doors framed a knot of people turning toward the sound, a colonel among them, the eagles bright on his shoulders, and the young airman who had run to fetch them pointing back across the floor at the woman in the gray jacket. "Squadron! Attention!" Fontaine's voice went off in the hangar like a round in a closed room. It wasn't a shout. It was a command delivered by a man who had spent 3 decades learning exactly how to pitch one, and it hit every airman on the floor at the base of the spine before their minds had time to catch up or argue. Chains stopped swinging, boots came together with a single ragged crack that resolved into silence. Faulkner's phone came down. The laughter died all at once, the way a fire dies when the air is pulled out from under it, and in the sudden quiet, the only sound was the faint tick of cooling metal somewhere in the aircraft. Culpepper's hand was still half raised where her arm had been. Colonel Dominic Fairbanks crossed the floor at an unhurried walk, 51 years old, the operations group commander, the man who owned every flying squadron on the base and answered to a general and almost no one else. His eyes went straight to the woman in the gray jacket, and something in his face opened. Recognition, and then a plain, unguarded respect he did not bother to hide in front of the airman, the respect of a man who had been a young captain once when her call sign meant something across an entire theater of war. He stopped a proper distance from her, and he did the thing that told the whole room the truth before a single rank was spoken. Colonel Fairbanks came to attention, and he was the senior officer in the building, and he held it. "Lieutenant Colonel Rourke," he said. "Ma'am, we weren't expecting you until this evening." A breath, and then, because some debts are older than protocol, he added it, quiet and certain, so the whole silent hangar heard it. "Banshee, it is an honor to have you early." For a moment, Culpepper's brain simply refused it. His face went through it in stages, the way a face does when the ground it has been standing on turns out never to have been there at all. Confusion first, a small, stupid smile still half formed on his mouth, then disbelief, the smile falling away, then recognition, the eyes going wide as the pieces slammed together into a picture he could not unsee, and then, last, horror, pure and cold and total, as his own hand, his hand, registered that it had been closed, seconds ago, around the arm of the woman who would command this squadron in the morning. He let go of the memory of it, as if the jacket had turned to fire. Fontaine's voice again, level now, for the young airman who still did not fully understand what they were looking at. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Delaney Rourke, gunship aircraft commander, Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor, a Silver Star, and a Purple Heart, out of Afghanistan. Tomorrow morning she takes command of this squadron." He paused, and when he went on, his voice had something in it The airman had never heard from the chief before. I flew in the back of her airplane. She brought us home through a fire that should have killed all of us. There is not a person in this hangar fit to carry her helmet bag. That includes me. Every airman in the building was already at rigid attention, back straight, eyes front. 7 young faces that had been laughing 4 minutes ago now white and still. The airman named Ruiz stood the straightest of all of them, and there was something almost like relief in his face. The relief of a person who had known the truth a few minutes before everyone else and had been made to carry it alone. Faulkner's phone hung forgotten at the end of his arm, still recording, still pointed at nothing, a small red light blinking in a silent hangar. Colonel Fairbanks turned his head a few degrees toward Culpepper without fully looking at him, the way a man glances at something he has not yet decided what to do with. "Sergeant Culpepper," he said, "this is your incoming squadron commander, the one you just put your hands on, in front of a camera that is still recording." Rourke stepped past the frozen sergeant, back to the cargo ramp he had shoved her off of. This time, no one on the floor so much as breathed toward stopping her. She walked up the ramp, into her aircraft, and laid her hand flat on the breech of the gun, the 105, the one he had called a cannon, and stood there a moment with her back to all of them, reading it the way she had been reading it the whole time, and no one in that hangar would ever again mistake the meaning of the way she stood. The airmen held their attention because Fontaine had not released them, but they would have held it anyway. Something had happened in the last 30 seconds that none of them had the years yet to name, and all of them understood in their bodies even so. They had watched a person they had written off in half a second turn out to be the most decorated aviator any of them would ever stand near, and they had watched her do nothing to earn the recognition except be exactly who she was while they mocked her for it. It was a lesson none of them had asked for, and not one of them would forget. And it had cost them nothing but their certainty, which was the one thing in the room that could most afford to be lost. Master Sergeant Neville Ardsley, Culpepper's flight chief, was across the floor in seconds, his face gone gray, already reaching for the sergeant's shoulder to march him out and start the paperwork that ends a career before it has properly begun. He looked to Colonel Fairbanks for the nod. Fairbanks looked to Rourke. It was hers to give. Everyone in the hangar understood that now, that the woman on the ramp held the only opinion in the room that counted, that the easiest thing in the world would be for her to end the young Loadmaster where he stood, and that not one person present would say a word against her if she did. She came down the ramp slowly. She looked at Culpepper for a long moment, the same flat, complete measurement she had taken of him at the very beginning, except that now he could feel every ounce of its weight, and could not look away from it, and did not deserve to. "Master Sergeant," she said to Ardsley, "stand down." Ardsley froze. "Ma'am." "He's a young airman," Rourke said. "He'll learn it standing up. Under me." She let that settle over the hangar. Don't break him. Teach him. Breaking him is easy, and it teaches him nothing, and it costs the Air Force a Loadmaster it spent good money training. I did not come home from that airplane so that we could get good at throwing our own people away over the worst 4 minutes of their lives. Honor the ones who never raise their voice. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault, and let this story find the people who need it. She stepped in close to Culpepper then, close enough that only he could hear it. And what she said to him, she said, without heat, in the same even voice she had used for everything from the moment she walked in. "You keep your stripes, Sergeant. You keep your job. Tomorrow I take this squadron, and you will serve in it, under me. And every single morning you are going to wake up and remember that the person you decided was nobody is the person who signs your evaluations now." Her eyes did not leave his. "That is a longer sentence than the one the Master Sergeant wanted to hand you, and a harder one. Serve it well, and in a year You will be a better airman than the one who shoved a stranger off a ramp this morning to make his friends laugh. That is the only kind of revenge I have ever had any use for. The other kind never brought anyone home." Culpepper's eyes were wet, and he did not trust his own voice. "Yes, ma'am," was all he managed to get out. It was enough. It was, in fact, the first correct thing he had said all morning. The change of command happened the next morning as scheduled, the band and the speeches and the ribbon, and Lieutenant Colonel Delaney Rourke took the squadron in front of a general and 300 guests, and the placard by the door had the correct tail number on it, because a certain staff sergeant had come in at 0500 and fixed it without being told to. In the weeks that followed, the airmen watched their new commander closely, the way a unit always watches the person who now holds their careers in her hands. And what they found was a woman exactly as quiet and exact and unhurried in a briefing as she had been standing in the middle of their mockery, a commander who did not raise her voice because she had never once needed to. And they watched Culpepper too, and saw a loud young man grow quieter and better and more careful with people. And none of them ever forgot the morning that had made the difference. 3 weeks later, on a gray afternoon, the squadron dedicated a small memorial wall inside the hangar. Names cut into dark stone. The air crew and the ground crews the unit had lost across 20 years of war. Lieutenant Colonel Rourke stood in front of it in her flight suit. The command hers now. The Eagles of tomorrow already the reality of today. And she reached up and ran the pad of her thumb along one line of carved letters. Airman First Class Samuel Redding. Staff Sergeant Culpepper stood a respectful pace behind her, in uniform, humbled in a way that had already begun, quietly and without anyone watching for it, to make him into a better airman than the loud one who had shoved a stranger off a ramp. "His name is Redding," Rourke said without turning around. "He was 20 years old. He stayed on his sensors through a fire so that 12 other men could go home to their families. He wanted a truck. He had a dog that didn't like anybody but him." She stepped aside, and she nodded once at the wall. "Come here, Sergeant." Culpepper came. At her nod, he pressed his open palm flat against the cold stone, over the carved name, the way she had once pressed her hand to a gun, and he held it there. "Remember him," she said. "Before you ever again decide who's nobody. Everybody you will ever meet is carrying something you cannot see. Most of them will never tell you. The quiet ones almost never do." And in the hush of that hangar, under the still blades of the gunship she now commanded, the young man kept his hand on the name of a man he had never met, and understood, at last, the true size of the thing he had very nearly walked right past. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault for more.